time for meditation. Shifting gears and letting ourselves come into present time. Making adjustments in our body, turning phones so that they don't ring, buzz, vibrate, levitate. And just taking a couple of really deep breaths, landing in the present, and just letting ourselves leave behind activities, the details, logistics, and movement to get here. And feeling ourselves in our body sitting. If the breath is available, connecting and allowing the in-breath to fill you. And the out-breath to relax and invite release, physical tension, thoughts, ideas, plans. And landing here. As the breath fills, as the body and heart and mind empty with the out-breath, can notice a clarity of awareness, of seeing, able to embrace, touch, know what is arising. And from a place of connection, from resource, having some energy from the breath, and release and relaxation from the out-breath. We can bring the clarity of our attention just notice if there's still places in the body that are tense or tight. And gently move towards them to touch the unpleasantness. And you might notice as you get close to that unpleasantness that there can be a reaction, hoping that it might go away, or a slight pulling back. And there's nothing you need to do with the reaction, but just see it. Notice that. And watch what happens. Does it get bigger? Does it dissipate? Does it stay the same? Does it change shape or density? And when it's no longer present, just return to an anchor. The coolness of the breath coming in, the warmth of the breath going out. Or it might be your feet on the floor, or your weight on the chair. Whatever anchor allows you the most connection, ease. And feeling your body relax. Like being a gatekeeper, a very friendly host, receiving whoever comes at your door. It might be an ache, a sadness, a joy, a gladness. A noise, a sigh. Touch it and notice what happens as you touch it. Do you want it to stay? Do you want it to change?
Hey!
Do you want it to be different?
Cool. Yay! Hello, hi guys. Hi. Hey, I'm at the meeting. Hey. That time, yay! Hey, when you're brushing your teeth, that's wonderful. Yay! Cool.
We never know what's gonna show up. Just at the door, welcoming what comes in, noticing reaction, the humor, the irony, the wanting, the not wanting, and receiving all of it.
Yay, washing hair time. Yay. Okay.
So we don't have a magic wand to control what arises, what we hear, what we feel, what we think. We have choice about where we focus
Yeah, that's good. And then the other one too. The other one.
and what we do in response to what we connect with.
Oh, cute. Cool.
So if there's any resistance,
Good, there you go.
just be aware of that resistance. Soften with it, around it.
Like the washcloth? Yeah. You. Make sure you wash. Make sure you wash down there. We don't leave the soap down there. You gotta rinse too.
just touching and noticing what's here, welcoming what's present. And as you turn towards it and receive it, see what happens. Sometimes our capacity is just to be with things, waiting for them to pass. That's as best as we can do, and we can just notice what that feels like. And then watch what happens as it does. So irritation or contraction or tightness or tension, we can know them as direct experience, and we can also know our reaction, our wanting it, not wanting it, wanting something different, wishing it were otherwise. And we can move attention to just touch. Touch the direct experience, the reaction to the experience, and watch what happens.
Yes. Moving into our somatic practice. So seated or standing. It's sometimes helpful to practice standing because you can feel more of your dimensions. I'm going to start for feeling for the quality of length in the body. So that's allowing the vertebrae to stack, moving down from the crown of the head through the ground. Can you feel the length in your leg bones? Can you allow yourself to grow an inch in either direction into your dignity? And can you feel for the dignity of others in the room? Moving into width, which is unfurling out along the shoulder blades, down through the arms and the hands. Can you feel for the edge of the body, and then just 5% beyond, into the plane of belonging, taking up space, being in relationship with other people. And feeling for depth. You feel the touch of the cloth on the back body. There's pressure or sensation there. Opening up to where you've come from, to those who have supported you on your path, to ancestors, lineages. Lowering down in the rib cage, this third dimension of depth, softening the eyes or the jaw. Is there a temperature, is there a pressure at the front body? How am I meeting this present moment? How am I moving towards more of what I'm longing for? And coming into center, which is a few inches below the belly button. And it sometimes helps to put a hand at the lower back to feel the aliveness between these two hands. You don't want to be locked in the knees, lowering down. Feeling for the aliveness that's here. What do I care about? What matters most to me? What am I longing for? And we're going to start with Judy. Judy, what are you longing for?
Freedom.
Moving to your left.
Awakening.
Ease. Peace.
Self-acceptance.
Ease. Non-thinking.
Giving and receiving love.
Well-being. Intimacy.
To be seen with love.
Safety.
Embracing goodness.
Embodiment.
And taking a minute to look around the room and allow your soma to be impacted by these longings, to be part of a collective body that's practicing towards freedom. And may we rest in the belonging and the safety that's here for all of us in our inquiry and our study tonight. Thanks, Amma.
Oh, there's that leaf bug.
Only on table.
She'll find her way out.
Well-
Actually, I don't know if they're all female. I know my bees are all girls, but I don't
Did
know.
you bring that?
I did.
She's off guessing bugs.
You never go in our backyard, you know. Whole bunch of them.
So regrouping and just pausing for a moment and looking at where we've come from. So we started this course looking at the body as the first foundation of mindfulness and the many different components of body, of breath, of posture, of daily life activities, and how helpful it is to have a body, to refer to the body, to let our body be our meditation temple, where it helps us anchor our attention in the present. It's the body is one of the gifts it brings, is that it doesn't live in the past and it doesn't live in the future, and it doesn't tell lies. And so there's huge gifts about coming into right relationship with our body, and so we've been talking about that. And it's where we can feel relaxed. And so we've also observed or noticed that one of the things that's not mentioned in the text, but something that we need to pay attention to, is that we need to actually cultivate the art of relaxation. Willa, one of my dearest, closest nun friends, when her name was Tanya, she said, "The Buddha awoke to what is, not what should be." And what is something that's happening in the present moment, and it's something that we can know in part by what's going on in our body. So the second foundation that we have also been touching, and we spent some time with it on the Daylon on Saturday, was the quality of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, the feeling tone that's underneath the body sensations or underneath emotions or connected to thoughts. And what we can also notice is that when there's something pleasant, the tendency is to grasp. And when something's unpleasant, the tendency is to contract or to push it away, to not want it to be there. So we all had a little bit of an opportunity this evening with our friend outside the hallway having a conversation, sweet conversation with his boy and his partner, and noticing the impact, what happens when we are meditating, so that's what we are doing, and we're hearing something that we didn't ask to hear, and there's a tension, it wasn't easy. And so then we can notice and watch what happens to our reactivity, our pulling or our waiting or our tension, and then when we attend to that tension, how it increases or decreases or stays the same. And then when the contact shifts, when the conversation ends, then we can also notice what happens and what happens to our body, what happens to our breath. So our practice opportunity is to learn to be steady in the face of pleasant, curious in the face of unpleasant, and seeing neutral as an opportunity to turn from things being two-dimensional to three-dimensional, from being black and white to having color and texture and tone. And when we do that, when we notice neutral, we wake up to a lot of things that ordinarily we miss. And so there's a vibrancy that happens with that. And so that's the first, second, and now the third foundation is mind objects, the emotions that we have, the thoughts, the memories, the liking and disliking experience. And we can notice that these things weave in and out with each other, that both Vedana and mind objects can notice. We can notice a physical correlate of each of them. We can also notice that bodily experience and thought, emotion, has Vedana, has pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral as something that we can pay attention to. So we can move our focus of attention to the sensation or the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, or the emotion or thought, and we can move back and forth. And how we move and when we move our attention depends on how we are reacting and what actually supports us to coming into more levels of ground, embodiment, ease, and relaxation, inner confidence and peace. We can also notice that sometimes a belief, sometimes our body sensations have underneath them certain beliefs or emotions. So it isn't a linear thing, it's like a synergy or a dovetailed process of things that are interwoven together. So here we are on our limbic-informed journey of the Foundations of Mindfulness course. And as I mentioned a few times, I'm part of this teacher certificate program that Jack and Tara are leading. And there's a whole bunch of students from all over the world, and there's a whole bunch of mentors. And so spontaneously, last night, Jack and Tara held a live presentation, and the talk was on trauma. And it was brilliant. So I took very detailed notes, thinking that I would share what was pertinent with us today, because a lot was really on point with exactly what we've been talking about. So this is Tara. So there were two sections. They spoke for an hour, and so I'm going to give a summary of what they talked about. Tara.
This is Tara Brock.
Tara Brock spoke about the way in which mindfulness can trigger people on retreats. So, and she says that when that does happen, what can happen is that it can cause feelings of overwhelm, feelings of not being safe, feelings of not feeling safety in one's body, a sense of shame. And so the other thing that can happen when this is going on is that a person who's being triggered in this kind of way hears the instructions and then freezes. And so they don't have any capacity to follow the instructions, and that also induces a sense of shame and a sense of failure. So she said, it's important to understand that there's a difference between emotional intensity and trauma. Because sooner or later, all of us are going to feel things that are intense. That kind of comes with the human package. And not all intensity is traumatic or coming from limbic injury. So that she talked about some basic things that we can notice, or that as teachers we can watch out for in our students. Which is that when somebody's navigating trauma or a very severe limbic injury, what they're dealing with is symptoms that look like hyperventilation, an acute startle response, changes in skin color, emotional volatility. If you ask them what's happening, they'll say it feels too much, or I feel numb, or it feels like I'm dying, or I can't feel my body. And what's really important, like hugely important for people who are navigating this, is for them to feel agency, that they've got choice, that they're not cornered, that they're not pushed into a position where they're having to do things that don't feel right. And so in giving instructions, and so listen now, not as teachers, but as practitioners, but if this is happening for you, listen with the ears of how do you create agency for yourself. Okay? To keep the eyes open, to walk, to use whatever anchor that you may be able to find that supports more ease, more relaxation, more comfort. Use the breath, but use the breath in a way that helps you calm down. And use touch points of the feet, touch points of the fingers, touch points of cloth on the skin. And then she used Dan Siegel's example of the brain, hand as brain. So in a normal operating system, if the thumb is the limbic system, the front fingers are the frontal cortex. And Dan Siegel uses this. symbol or this gesture, yeah? And then something happens, we get hugely triggered and we blow our lid, okay? So when we blow our lid, our frontal cortex is not actually able to help bring us the comfort that we need. So when I was using the personal example of the fabric softener, no amount of clarity about what was actually happening was helping me to regulate, okay? So we need to learn how to self-soothe when we get like that. We need to learn how to speak limbic, not to speak vipassana. How to actually navigate our systems, our nervous systems when they're like that. And that's part of the reason why I'm interested in this course, that we can start talking about these things so we develop a repertoire so that, you know, when we're fine and regulated, we don't need to use those tools. But when we're not fine, when we're dysregulated, when our systems are feeling agitated, or when our friends are feeling agitated, then we know that what's helpful is to go up and to just, you know, be friendly and kind and say, oh, let's count windows together, or how many chairs can you count? Or I see a Coke bottle and a red bottle, and what else is red? And so that with sound, with words, with naming things, we begin to tie together the frontal cortex to help us to soothe and to calm a nervous system that's having a hard time regulating. So then she went on to talk about different books, David Trevelyan's book, the Trauma-Informed Mindfulness, Sensitive Mindfulness, and then Peter Levine, and how Peter Levine's work is brilliant in helping us understand how to work with trauma and pendulate back and forth. And then she talked about the Medusa myth. The Medusa, I read about it today. The end part of the story is Medusa is turned into a monster. So we'll start at the end part of the story, which is where she brings us to. Medusa is this monster and has hair that are made out of venomous snakes. And the thing about Medusa is that if you look at her directly, you turn to stone. Yet, with the help of Athena's shield, Perseus was able to avert his gaze so that he could get close to her, but not look at her directly. And he kept his strength and his power. He kept his vitality. So with trauma, Tara is saying, we need a shield to protect us from looking directly at the pain in order to release it. And so it's like, okay, so what does that look like for each of us? And that will be an interesting, contemplation. And then she went on to say that if we can't fight or flee, we freeze. And the freeze response traps trauma in our body. But she also went on to say that part of our survival mechanism is to keep fixating on the source of the problem, to need to activate the window of tolerance, to move our focus of attention away from this loop, because the system is organized around wanting to keep grabbing onto the thing that's actually causing the trigger. And what we need to do is shift our attention away from that in order to actually find where we can calm down and relax and have more, expand our window of tolerance. And again, to use paying attention to grounding our bodies, to gravitation, to the feeling of being held, to the five senses, and that friends can help us with focusing our attention with breath, with movement. But what is really important is that when we are calmer or calm enough, is in these times to identify what would be a good anchor for us to focus our attention on when we are dysregulated, so that we're not having to figure it all out in the middle. It's like we get our first aid kit box sorted out, packed, labeled, and placed in an accessible place so that when we're hurt, we can just have at it. So what's also really helpful to remember is that with PTSD, all of this is common, and that this is, in fact, something that people experience, the symptoms are definitely a result of coping. And it is not your fault that these things are here. These things are here because of the causes and the conditions that have given rise to them. So what is our kind of opportunity is to feel these things and to find a pathway to loving presence, to the heart space, and then to do what we need to do to customize metta, to move from a traumatized self to a self where we experience wholeness. So I'm just going to repeat that. Thank you, Judy. To move from, to find our way with loving presence, and to find a heart space where we can bring kindness in. And it may mean that we need to be generous in our customizing metta in a way that works for us. And so that we can slowly move from a traumatized self to the experience of wholeness, of goodness and mystery. So it's like, right on, Tara. Then Jack spoke. And he contextualized it, saying, in any group, 50 people have trauma. 50% of the group has trauma. And within any group, 10 to 20% has very significant trauma. But then he went on to say that in the Ajahn Chah monastery, nobody ever spoke about trauma. We just talked about dukkha. And yet, within an Ajahn Chah context, as a gifted teacher, he was present to meet people exactly where they were at, and saw all kinds of things come through the gates in the monastery in terms of challenges. So a loving, mindful loving awareness was big enough to hold it all. And yet he reiterated that deep healing is advised to be done with skilled support. And then went on to talk about particular stories about how that happened, and challenging situations that the people were navigating. And one of the things that he mentioned is that one of his students in the group that she was teaching, so this was a meditation teacher who had a group, and one of the students, or one of the participants in the group, committed suicide. And so he was advising this woman to do a ritual, to have a candle lighting ritual, and to invite everybody to light a candle, and to say, what can we evoke that can help us hold this? And then also to ask, who else in this group has experienced suicide? To know that this is also part of what happens in life, and this is what we have to hold. And then he said, with this heartbreak that comes with something like this, it doesn't go away. He said, but what it can do is it can make you tender, and it can make you wiser, and it brings a fire. And then you get to choose what you do with that fire. If you let it eat you up and destroy you, or if you use this fire to create something that is magnificent. And so that's part of the choice that we have. But he also suggested this to the woman. He said, to ask everybody in the group, to ask the person who committed suicide, what would you want from me now? To loop it around and engage with them and come back into relationship, so that as we turn towards the tears and the beauty, we do this in the presence, in the face of mystery. We do this as a gateway to freedom. So I just want to pause here, because this is rich and juicy stuff. And I just want to ask you, invite you to notice the impact of hearing their words, and just pause. Just turn your attention allow yourself to feel whatever's arising. Just notice what's happening in your body, what's happening in your mood. Just notice your thoughts. And as you are present with this, can you also notice a loving awareness big enough that's able to hold it all, present with it all? So I want to shift gears again and come back into the theme that I was wanting to speak about tonight, which was to introduce the fourth foundation of mindfulness and to talk about the Four Noble Truths. And so if we just consider these talks that Jack and Tara gave, they talked about trauma, some of the ways that it was triggered, ways to deal with it, and pathways to generate support for ongoing study and practice. And so, from this perspective, what they did was they gave a talk on the Four Noble Truths, only they didn't once mention any of those words. Now let's see if we can talk about the Four Noble Truths in some of the classic language, and see if in doing that we can open up how we relate to it and how it's relevant in our own lives. So the Four Noble Truths, which is one of the many components of the fourth foundation of mindfulness, it's looking at the Dhamma as in terms of these different lenses. The Four Noble Truths, the hindrances, the aggregates, the sense bases, the factors of awakening, all of them are lenses to look at, to explore, to be curious about what's happening in the present moment. And the Four Noble Truths is of that. And it in itself is a huge teaching. It's like a hologram. It's a piece that contains the whole. It contains a complete set of instructions that bring us into right relationship with stress and instructs us to focus in a particular way so that the stress releases and what emerges is a path of freedom. So just in the way that Jack and Tara did with trauma, the whole path is also about understanding, seeing the cause, finding a way to release, and then gathering support to help us on our way. So in the Four Noble Truths, it's centered around this idea of dukkha. Dukkha is often poorly translated as suffering. It's maybe more sophisticated to talk about it as stress or unsatisfactoriness. And this is that feeling of contraction, of not wanting, of wanting it to be different, we can notice that stress shows up in different ways. And so the simplest, the most obvious form of seeing stress is the stress of unpleasant experience, the stress of pain. But dukkha also covers you can talk about the dukkha of change. And so it's harder to notice how something that is beautiful, it's harder to notice how something that you absolutely love is also connected to dukkha. But when we understand that what we love, what we cherish, doesn't stay the same, it changes. Or last night I went for a walk and the sunset was absolutely spectacular, and it fades. It was only spectacular for a short period of time. So it isn't that there's anything wrong about the fact that it changes, but the fact that it changes means that if there's any trace of wanting it to stay, then we experience the change as stress as it is moving out of our grasp. But there's another kind of dukkha, and the third kind of dukkha is the most subtle and the most difficult to kind of wrap our minds around, and that's the dukkha of conditioned existence. So I studied biology and biochemistry, and in those courses I took a class in thermodynamics. And thermodynamics for me is the closest physical expression of the dukkha of conditioned existence. Because what thermodynamics says is that things are constantly falling apart, and it takes a lot of energy in order to keep them together. And so even if we just look at the simple thing of like having enough to eat, or having clean clothes, or what it takes to keep ourselves washed and the bed made, and the simplest things of living, there's a constant energy that's needed in order to keep the thing holding together. And if we don't do stuff for a while, it's not very nice. It falls apart. Yeah. So we can also see that, one of the ways that we can experience change is when watching our bodies age, So none of us are 20 anymore. And our bodies are shifting. And some of us have got gray hair. Some of us have got a lot of gray hair. Some of our body parts are going south.
Gone.
Sometimes we've got hair that's showing up in places that it didn't used to, and sometimes there's places where it used to and it's going away. It's like there's this whole process of being with a human body as we're getting older. And many of us have feelings about that, It's like it's a process to feel our way into, and to notice the places where we have resistance and where it feels uncomfortable, where it feels unsettling, where it's like, just it doesn't feel easy. So this whole conversation around dukkha is not to become a killjoy where we superimpose this idea that we shouldn't experience joy, but just to notice the places where we start to contract and pull back, or where we push, where we want it to be different than the way that it is. So the first of the Noble Truths is that there is dukkha, and then the second of the Noble Truths is that there's a cause of dukkha, and it is so deeply ingrained in our culture that when we feel any sort of stress, is to externalize and try and find a reason that is outside that we can fix in order to make it go away. And so we look at everything that's going on around us that's causing the distress, and it's very, very rare that we turn our attention inwards. And so, we're looking at the weather, we're looking at the lack of power, we're looking at the crazy dynamics that are going on. But the interesting thing about blame is that we've got one finger out, we've got three fingers pointing back. And so when we use this as a way of turning our attention to see, where am I placing my attention on the things that I don't want? Where am I hankering after what I want? And that gives us a kind of key for having this whole thing open up and being able to find a different relationship with things that may in fact be mildly or medium or intensely unpleasant. Now, there's two places that I want to go with this, and I'm not going to have time to do other than just mention. But this second noble truth is where dependent origination is found. That's the cycle of dependent origination. It's unpacking the causes that give us the links that show us where suffering is created. And I want in the next class to look at that, but to superimpose the ordinary cycle of dependent origination and how it gets compounded when we have a limbic injury. How it gets stickier and even more glue-like and even more something that sets us up to be perceiving things in a particular way, so that we can begin to see both the way the elegance of these teachings are, as well as see that when we're navigating trauma or limbic injury, or when our friends are, that we need to actually be extra careful about how we practice in order to support the right thing, because our systems are completely primed to put us back into a stress response. So we're understanding stress, not to become stress sniffer dogs, but so that we can unpack it and understand how we can make choices to experience more ease, more relaxation, and more calm settledness in our own mind-body systems, and how we can show up for each other when we're on these different parts of the bell curve as friends. So I think I'm out of time.
I was supposed to. You're perfectly on time. That was the exactly right moment.
Yes, please.
It's just going to be so hard to sort out what is going on. It's as though the limbic injury causes this mush in the mind, and you get on a pattern, an unhealthy pattern that in some way might reduce the stress, but it's so hard to figure out exactly what sets you on that pattern. That's my experience.
Yeah, but you see, I think what's needed is, rather than to try and figure out what sets you on the pattern, is just to come up with strategies to redirect you out of it.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the clarity to figure out what actually were the causes and the conditions. So the Paticca Samuppada is useless when we're dealing with limbic injury from the perspective of having the discernment to know the links all that go beforehand. So part of the reason why I'm doing this is not because I think that we need to always use it, but to know when it's not helpful. Yeah? So it's an absolutely magnificent, brilliant teaching. And like any medicine, there's a time when it's useful and a time when it's not helpful. And when we know that, then that puts us in a completely different ball game than when we don't. So water, like what, 70% of our body's made out of water? Yeah. If we drink too much of it, we can die, you know? And so every single thing, even the things that are absolutely essential, if we don't have them in the right moderation or in the right sequence or in the right time, it can completely dysregulate our system. So when I say that, what happens?
It's helpful. It's helpful, and I say to myself, there's always the self-improvement side of things, but I would be helpful to remember to try not to figure it out, but to try to come back to the present and be with what's arising, and find some steps to help ground the mindfulness in the present moment rather than, just get all shook up by trying to figure out why I'm going down this path yet again.
So the discernment, and this is tricky. The discernment that I see is that so much of our meditation practice is about turning towards pain.
Yeah.
And so much of limbic injury is to just notice that it's there and redirect away from it.
Yeah.
And what we don't yet have is like the GPS of when you do one and when you do the other. It's like we don't yet have the somatic register of when we turn towards it and watch our reactivity with it, and when our systems are dysregulated to the point where that's actually going to further compound it. And what we need is to just notice that we're dysregulated and bring in things that are going to help us calm, which is to turn away from unpleasant thoughts, feelings, sensations, and to focus on neutral or positive or joyful.
One of the things that can happen is that you have this experience of dysregulation, and the pattern that you have developed is it's taking you away from the unpleasantness of that, but it's an unhealthy pattern. And I'll just use an example. When I was on the month-long retreat, I have a very difficult time on retreats. A lot of stuff comes up, and my response is flight. I just don't want to go there. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to sit. I want to go get some chocolate or whatever. But it's so easy when you're upset by what's going on, is then to move towards whatever addictive behavior is coming up. Like I want to talk to somebody, or I want to eat, or I want to not do what's prescribed on at that point on retreat. This is just an example. But sometimes you just want to follow that pattern that sort of eases your distress, but it's not a healthy pattern.
Okay, so this is where I would take issue.
Yeah.
Because I think it's not a healthy pattern when it is actually wise for you to be on a 1 month retreat.
Mm.
It is an absolutely healthy pattern when it's not wise for you to be on a 1 month retreat. And I think the bias that we all come from is that it's always wise to be on a 1 month retreat, because retreats are where we deepen our practice. And what I think we need to learn is that there's times when it's actually not what we need. So I've been in monasteries, I've had experiences myself, I've seen incredibly senior monks go through periods of time where they couldn't be in silent retreat. They needed to be in nature or go for walks or things like that, And so we have a view that we superimpose, and I think that's part of what we need to start massaging about. How do we know that actually it's an unskillful pattern to be talking to somebody? I think what's happening is that, I don't know, because I wasn't on the retreat with you to actually know what you were navigating, so I can't say for sure. I'm just speculating out loud, yeah? But sometimes what happens is the pressure of the places where we have been fragmented, or the pain of what we've been through comes to the surface in a way where what we need is a tenderness, is a holding, is a human warmth, okay? To feel that it's safe enough to touch, to even have the interest to go there, okay? But the culture around meditation retreats are not set up with that. It's the opposite. They're set up where you're in silence, on your own, alone. You spend 10 minutes talking to somebody every other day no physical contact is allowed. And so everything so just let's look and see with like a 2-year-old. You know, a 2-year-old falls down and has an owie, and the adults who are good enough caretakers pick her up and say, oh, you got an owie. And she goes, hoo, 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 and then laughs. Okay, it's over. They wouldn't tell the 2-year-old, go sit in the corner by yourself and figure it out. That's just like, it's completely, that would be monstrous, okay? So when we have 2-year-old parts of ourselves that are erupting on a retreat, if we do not have the capacity to mother ourselves, to hold ourselves, to bring, oh sweetheart, you got an owie. Let's go for a walk and look at the turkeys together. And let's see if the turkeys can help us fix the owie. If we don't have the ability to connect with ourselves at the appropriate level that we are showing up and mother for ourselves in the ways that we didn't get the care when we needed, then what we're just doing is compounding the same wounding. So part of the skill that I have had to develop is how to move in and out of being a meditator and being my own therapist, my own mommy, you know. And part of it's owies and part of it's anger. Like for me, I've got this whole thing about not allowing anger. So I would spontaneously sing songs about hitting somebody over the head with a frying pan. And when I would do that, it would clear through my system in like 3 minutes. But if I was like this totally cool dude meditator person, you know, where I'm sitting and I'm silent and I'm like, I'm doing the practice, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, and I'm dysregulated and furious and I don't understand what's going on. But 3 minutes of singing the song about hitting somebody over the head with a frying pan, it's like, okay, I'm back in my body, I know what's happening, I can focus on it, and it's gone. So it's this fluid movement between being a meditator and being tremendously resourced and responsive to what's happening and engaging with it in a way that actually is supportive, what's needed now. And the discernment is to figure out when to observe and when to engage.
Well, you just have to, if there's a fall, that's not part of the meditation instruction ever, right? Or else you ping pong between doing that and doing your magic or something like that. There's nothing sort of in between where you kind of do a self-assessment that I'm out of balance and I need to do something other than what I was told to do on day one when I showed up on the retreat. Right? It's just, I don't know how it developed that way, but it's like,
because the assumption is that most people are in the middle part of the bell curve, and that the meditation instructions, when people have a nervous system that's sufficiently regulated, then it is possible to bring discernment to what is happening and through observation to have things resolve themselves. So the practice does work, but it works when you've got a nervous system that is able to observe. When you don't have a nervous system that's able to observe, then you need a different instruction. In the same way that it would be unconscionable for any of us to tell a 2-year-old, go in the corner, sit there quietly, and figure out what happened with your owie and make it better by yourself, and don't talk to me. I mean, this is just impossible.
Well, it's not only impossible for a 2-year-old, it's impossible for us grown-ups too.
yeah.
I mean, things are resolved, trauma, owies, whatever, are resolved in connection. They're not resolved by sitting down and shutting up.
I mean, this is why Temple's story is so, I mean, you probably all heard Temple's story about spending 8 months with U Pandita, and then he goes to Paul Locke's place, and he says, everybody's all happy and relaxed and comfortable, and he says, what the hell are you guys doing? I'm gonna show you guys how to practice, you know? You know, and it's like, but this is where he was able to make some real headway, and it was complete cultural reversal from what
Yeah.
He has this other monastic experience.
Right, right.
Somehow this other Upandita thing is what got brought here and exposed the most of us.
I mean, Ajahn Chah is not Upandita, but there was something in the Ajahn Chah forest tradition where there's this real toughness, and so it took years, sometimes decades, for us to soften through that. Like, Ajahn Viradama tells a story when he was a young monk in Thailand. There's the Tutanga practices, which are the ascetic practices, and so, as a young monk, tough, you think that the more ascetic stuff you do, then the faster you're gonna get to where you want to go. And so there's eating one meal. There's 12 Tutanga practices. One of them is not lying down to sleep. One of them is wearing rag robes, and I can't remember all of them. But basically what it means is that, okay, so you're not sleeping, you're eating in only one sitting, so you don't have seconds, or when there's this thing about that. And so it's like, okay, so he was completely sleep deprived, and in Thailand they have these asanas. So he was nodding, and he fell off the asana and split his head open, because he was totally sleep deprived. And so Ajahn Chah's response was, chill out, dude, relax, But there's this sense that there's this feeling that if I put this huge effort, then a huge result is going to happen. And what we need is to finesse and to know what's needed at any time. And sometimes what's needed is silence, and sometimes what's needed is connection. And the retreat centers are not set up for connection.
But isn't there is maybe an implied connection because you're not alone? I mean, I guess some religious monks do spend a lot of time alone, but usually it's in connections, in a collective, right, of people going through the same kinds of things, and isn't there sort of a maybe unspoken connection there that happens?
Tom, certainly there can be a deep connection that people can feel with that. That's absolutely true. But when some of this raw, rough stuff comes up, we don't need like the existential knowing that we're all sitting in the same room together. What we need is to have somebody that we can trust, who can see us, that can help with this witnessing what's happening that's so difficult to witness by ourselves.
Well, my other experience with retreats is that there is help for people that get into that state, that usually they're set up to handle that. When you go to Audio, they always have people available to talk to if you're in one of those kinds of states.
So then the question is there enough support? And so, the feedback that I get is that sometimes there's enough support, and people feel really deeply supported through what they go through, and sometimes not. And so I don't mean to in any way limit the power and the richness of the meditation experience. But as we navigate these spectrums of what can happen for us in our human life, then we need to have more tools about how to be skillful and make good use of a retreat situation, even when that might mean this is actually not the time for me to be on retreat, and to register that that's not an act of failure, that's an act of wisdom, compassion, and kindness. Mm-hmm. Because that's true.
Yeah.
That's just true. Yeah.
I would like to give support for the suggestion of having ritual, because there's a way in which certain things you can't contain, or you can't cure, and you can't handle. And sometimes if you externalize in some form, and just the headline on the story is, once I was dating somebody and I ended the relationship, and then I got a letter in the mail threatening to behead me. And I thought, probably. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to shift. Yes, that's kind of what I felt. And so I did ask the police, was this, people write silly letters like this all the time? They said, no, as a matter of fact, people do get beheaded. It can happen a lot. And then we figured out by the content of the letter who it was. And the police called this individual and said they were aware of this person and this letter, and they were watching out for me, that sort of thing. Where the trauma came was I had just finished retreats, compassion for all beings, all suffering beings, so how to handle that, because this person was clearly suffering if they were threatening to behead somebody, and on the other hand, I was suffering because I was afraid to go out the door, and this person knew where I lived. And so what I finally did was kind of what you talked about, and Jack does a lot, was just get the letter, get candles, get some incense, and burn the letter, and let it go in smoke with wishes, for well-being for me and for him. To not hold on to this something I had to become paranoid about for the rest of my life, that I was going to be killed or murdered. So I find that very helpful to do when something is bigger than we can figure out logically, legally, or spiritually.
No, I think it's true, because what we're doing is we're engaging in it. We're asking the earth to help.
The earth to help us, right? Something, the larger thing that I'm a part of, and that person was a part of too. Yeah. So yay for ritual.
Yeah.
And you don't know what else to do.
Not sure we do enough ritual in our society, actually.
Yeah. So I think it's time to please. So let's shift to inquiry.
So let's go ahead and pair up, and Amanda, if you would do a pair as well, because we'll have an even number of folks. And then I've got 2 questions. So first, just find a partner.
No, you should do something else. I'll go over to Jen.
Okay.
Oh, did you come together?
Yes.
Oh, you came together. Yeah. We're trying to
I'll
mix
go
up
with
because
Liz.
we've been together.
Right.
We're trying not to go steady. I'll go over here.
Keep on your place, huh?
He's not the murderer. Make sure you know.
Well,
Okay.
I can do that.
Michael?
We've not been together.
We go, yeah.
Okay.
Judy's free. There we go.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So, the first question, we're gonna take 5 minutes on the first question, so we'll split that time, 2.5 minutes for each person. The person who closest to me is gonna start first. And the question is, what happens when you touch dukkha? What happens when you touch dukkha or suffering? Or another somatic check out. We only have like 7 minutes. 7.
That's good. Alright, so okay, so coming back into the room together, our last practice of the evening, standing or seated, however you're feeling right in this moment. Right, we started our evening with what are we longing for, right? For ourselves, for the world. So maybe we can revisit that and we can extend it to ourselves and also out into the world. So we're going to start with a practice of what are we longing for the earth? So extending downward, and again, allowing that answer to arise from your soma, from center. So first thought is best thought. Marcy, let's start with you.
Courage and rejuvenation.
It's counterclockwise in the Western Hemisphere, so it's connectivity and calmness.
Healing.
Connection.
Belonging.
Healing.
Safety.
Do something.
Nurturing.
Healing.
Healing. Wholeness. Limits.
Healing.
And allowing ourselves to feel the support of the earth as we've called these longings into being here this evening. All right, and we'll do another round, raising your arms if possible. All right, we'll be calling in our longings from above, from the sky, from the heavens, from all that is unknown. Let's start with you, Kedra.
Freedom. Centeredness.
What do you got up there?
Up.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Marcy.
Equanimity.
Cool.
Spaciousness.
Joy.
Release.
Wonder.
Connection.
Clear seeing.
Awareness.
Equanimity.
Healing.
Nurturing.
And then bringing it inside. And really allowing the answer to arise from the body. What are we calling in for ourselves? And we'll start with you, René.
Care.
Happiness.
Balance.
Rest and healing.
Self-love.
Love.
Peace.
Acceptance.
Tenderness.
Love.
Connection.
Tenderness.
Allowing.
Tenderness.
Now we're going to turn and we're going to extend out to the world beyond this room. And so just the goodness that we've generated here tonight in our practice, again, allowing that extension to connect and come from center. We're each going to speak a person, a community, someone out there that we want to send the blessings of our practice and of the goodness that we've generated here tonight too. And we'll start with Judy.
Chris.
And moving to the left.
Bob.
Wrong one.
All animals.
Martha.
Palestine.
Barbara.
All beings.
Eric.
Jack.
The curtains.
Debbie, Amiko, and Marikit. Christy. Mia.
And coming back together, allowing all those beings to be with us as we dedicate the merit. Thank you everyone for this beautiful and generous practice tonight. Allowing ourselves to feel the goodness of what we've created here and to extend it out to all beings in all directions without exception. May we walk this path of freedom with belonging and safety. May we know that this liberation is ours. May we know that the future is ours and that the togetherness of Sangha is what makes it all possible. Thank you all for being with us here tonight. Any other words, Amma?
No, I don't have any. Thank you.
Cool.
Very good.
Very good. Very good. Yay! Doesn't get better than that.